Entertainment Soldier here, and I am back talking about Masters of the Air, Season 1, Episode 6, and my thoughts on this episode. Another fantastic episode, but this episode I think is a very important episode because we focused on mental illness, especially to deal with the military, because in that time it was still a kind of taboo issue, but more and more countries, more and more militaries were accepting that the mental illness that soldiers go through was a real thing. Because in the First World War, it was pretty much ignored, but by the end of the First World War, they were starting to realize this isn't fake, this isn't soldiers trying to run away from war, this is a serious mental condition. And in the Second World War, it was still being developed, it was still being studied, and we find out how, especially in the Air Corps, how the pilots were able to kind of, relax and get help with their condition. Now, it's not the best of help because, again, we at this point in history, they still didn't call it PTSD. They still kind of didn't really understand it, but they understood that sometimes soldiers need time off. And I love that about this episode. They showed you how they tried to, get them away from the battlefield, give them time off, and, just take a break, in which everybody needs. But this episode wasn't just about that, it was also about prisoners of war. Because last episode, Bucky had to jump out of his plane over Germany, and the worst place for a Allied pilot to jump out of was over Germany, because unlike jumping over France or Belgium or even Norway, there's hope you can find a resistance cell or the locals will give you a hand from hiding from the Germans. But if you jump and land in Germany, the locals want to kill you. Now there's a lot of, historical stuff about, RAF pilots and American pilots when they jumped out over Germany. Some of them would get put in prison, but there was a lot of incidents where the Germans would lynch them because the hatred the Germans had for bomber pilots. Because you've got to remember, at this point in the war, both America and Britain are bombing the shit out of Germany, killing a lot of people. The RAF's biggest focus was on cities, and in this episode we do see the aftermath of an RAF attack and how the locals are very angry at, bomber pilots. Now you can understand their anger because of all the of all the terrible stuff that's happened to them, and you kind of have to understand it from their point, because they've probably lost loved ones, they probably lost family, friends, and they probably see it as a war crime. Now yes, it is a war crime to kill civilians, but it was the Second World War, it was something that had to be done, it was evil, I will give them that. But what the Germans did to Allied pilots was in itself as evil. Killing a defenseless man is still killing a defenseless man. And in this episode, we do see a lot of that. Especially one scene with a shovel, which is just like, wow, it was that bad. So, as a whole, this episode, again, was just amazing. Oh, and at the end of the episode, what I predicted from last week, a person not being dead, I was completely right, and I'm happy he's back. So, episode as a whole, fantastic. It is a 10 out of 10 again. This series just goes from strength to strength to strength, and I love it. So, let's go to spoilers now. If you don't want to hear spoilers, leave in 3, 2, 1. So the episode starts off with Bucky, at a farm, grabbing some food, hiding in a tree, and trying to find a way back to the back to England or find somewhere safe to hide outside of Germany. Unfortunately, whilst he's trying to escape Germany, he bumps into some farm kids, tries to keep them quiet, but then the kids, shout out an American is in the area, alert their dads. Their dads grab shotguns and hunt down Bucky. Bucky tries to hide in a swamp. He waits for one of the Germans to pass by him, who's telling him in German, surrender, they're not there to hurt him. And as Bucky lets the guy go past, he sees his opportunity to escape, but unfortunately the other farmer German with a shotgun points his shotgun at him and tells him the war is over for you now. And yes, Bucky gets taken away and put on a train to a prisoner of war camp. At least that's what we think at first. After the credits scene, we meet back up with Cross, who's heading to Cambridge. He's been ordered by his colonel to head down there to relax for a little bit because he's still, not really dealing well with losing Bubbles. And he's now been sent to this summit where all the allies, bomber crews are going to, start talking to each other. And, it's kind of just a gathering of minds, basically. He then gets taken to his room where he's told that he will meet his roommate in a bit. He thinks it's a man, but later we'll find out it's not that. And so he's just going to have to stay in Cambridge and relax for a little bit, just to cool off. So the next scene, we go to Rosenthal and his crew heading to a mansion where they have been sent by the same colonel to, detox, relax, and, calm them down, because the command is starting to fear that the crew has become flak happy, and they know that these sorts of, crews, these sorts of missions can take a toll on the crew. So they're just being sent to this place to relax, to get their mind off the war, have some fun, and then when they've had a lot of time off and when the doctors have cleared them, they'll be sent back on mission, and hopefully they'll be mentally better, let's just say. Rosenthal isn't really happy with this. He hates the fact he's been taken off rotation. He doesn't think this is, the right time to take him off mission. He wants to go back up and start, dropping bombs again. But the woman kind of just tells him, take this opportunity to relax, take this time to have a bath, have some food, just take a break. Take a break from the war, which would actually be good for him, because he's also lost a friend on his first mission. He was the only bomber crew to survive the last mission, and so this would be a great time for him to just relax, and for his crew as well, because you can see on a lot of the crewmen that it is taking their toll. It is affecting them mentally, and again, this is a time where PTSD was still not really known. So again, nobody knows what to do with these guys who have mental problems other than to take them somewhere and just let them have a break. So Rosenthal is, still trying to fight this. He still just wants to get on with the mission, win the war, but it's going to take a bit long, and his mental, stability is more important than just throwing him in a plane and hoping that he comes back. So we go back to Bucky, who's on a train with a bunch of other bomber pilots. He tries to ask one of the bomber pilots about his leg because it's seriously injured, if he can run on it. The Germans kind of tell him to shut up because they don't want them talking to each other. And so Bucky does. The train stops. They get off of it. Turns out the train has stopped in a city that has just been attacked by the RAF. Now at this time, the RAF has stepped up its nighttime attacks on cities. The RAF have stopped bothering with, strategic stuff. It's mainly now focusing on the German population at this point. Now, a lot of people would say that is probably a very evil thing for the RAF to have done, but this is a war. And killing the people making the planes, making the rifles, is a lot easier than trying to focus on destroying the plants. Again, I don't really want to defend what the RAF did. Listen, it was evil, but they were in a war. We were in a war with the Nazis who were trying to take over the fucking world. We had to use some sort of tactic at this point. The Americans were focusing on, plants and factories. Britain had to focus on, the more important target. And unfortunately, that was the German citizens. And listen, it was evil. I can't defend that, but I'm not going to say what those pilots... I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there. Okay, I understand why they did it. Could I have done it? Could I have gone in a plane and dropped millions of bombs on civilians? I honestly don't know. Because I've only heard the stories from my grandparents, from other people from that time period, and they all say the same thing. It was a war. It was terrible, but if they didn't do that, then the Germans might have won the war. So I'm just giving my opinion on this. I don't think it was great that Britain bombed civilians, but it was a war. And that's the best argument I have right now. I'm sure there's probably historians out there who probably say this and this reason. For me, I understand it. I don't like it, but I do understand it. So Bucky and the other pilots are then forced to walk through the burning town where a bunch of German civilians who are picking up their dead and rubble see a bunch of American bomber pilots. So they were obviously going to be angry about this, and they were, but that didn't make what they did right. Killing these unarmed men who have literally... I mean, yes, they probably have dropped bombs, but they had no right to kill them. Because whilst they're walking through, the German citizens start calling them bastards, start throwing rocks. Even some of the guards around the civilians don't even seem to react. And sure enough, one of the Germans grabs one of the pilots and cuts his throat open. Bucky tries to defend himself and his fellow pilots, but it doesn't work out well. The guards are overwhelmed, and then one other guard who's was helping the civilians grabs a pistol, starts shooting as many of the American pilots as he can. When he gets to Bucky, he has no bullets left, so one of the civilians grabs a log and whacks Bucky in the head. Again, I would consider this kind of a war crime. They were soldiers, they did surrender, and the Germans should have defended them and not put them in that position in the fucking first place. But this was the Nazis, so nothing really does surprise me about those bastards. So, back in Cambridge, Cross is doing some weird thing in front of a mirror where he pretends to be some actor. Then we find out that his roommate is not a man, but a woman called Sandra? Yeah, Sandra. Yeah, so she's told him she's his bunkmate. She's okay with having a male bunkmate. He's kind of a little bit, confused about the entire situation. This is not really what normally happens in America. They don't really share bunks. But she kind of just relaxes him and says, listen, she's fine with it. You can be fine with it. Let's just get over that. So Cross has a little bit of a funny moment there. Whilst they're in Cambridge, he has a little talk with some of the people there. You then find this British captain, I think, who's talking about, Americans on leave and how they're acting bad, in his opinion. Getting drunk, having too much sex, blah, blah, blah. And Cross comes up to defend his people by telling this captain they don't know if this is their last day on Earth, because they're going to be sent up in a bomber and they could be shot down or killed. So he's not going to try to punish people who are just trying to have some fun when it could be their last day. And which I like that. And Rosa I mean, Sandra is also there, and she kind of also steps in to defend Cross as well, and asks Cross about what Americans think of the Brits, and it was a kind of little bit of funny scene. We go back to Rosenthal, who is still at the mansion, where he sees all of his, pilots, relaxing, playing croquet or whatever it's called. But he comes across one pilot who's sobbing on his own, and this is kind of where you see PTSD is real. This guy has probably survived a lot of bombing runs. He's feeling guilty, but he has a mental illness, and PTSD is the worst, or at least one of the worst conditions anybody can ever go through. It's that bad. Some people have been led to suicide because of it. And at this time period, the best anybody can actually do is just give these guys a break. And I'm glad they showed that. I'm glad they showed that not everybody will cope with this fight. Showing how bad war can be just for a person mentally, which I really did enjoy. Because even today, PTSD, which we know more about now, which we try to deal with more, we still don't do enough to deal with it. We still don't give enough money to the charities, to the hospitals that need more funding for this problem. And more soldiers, especially in the UK, get killed by PTSD than anything. And it's a massive tragedy for the armed forces, which nobody really does speak about, which I kind of get really angry about, because these men have done a lot for us. And again, I was a reservist myself, so I've seen a bit of it myself. Nothing that bad, but I have seen some people who've dealt with it, and it's a terrible thing. Some people will never get over the stuff they saw, and all they ask is for help, and nobody's there to help them. It is a fucked up world we live in sometimes, when all they ask for is help, but we don't help them. Sorry, I know, a bit personal and all that stuff. I'm not talking about me having PTSD. I'm talking about people I've worked with. Hospital people. It's a big thing. But yeah, it is a tragedy, and the fact that nobody even talks about it anymore is beyond ridiculous to me. But anyway, after this, we go back to Bucky, who's on a carriage that's got all the bodies of the other Americans. And when the carriage comes to a stop, you can hear one of the American pilots, praying. And one of the Germans grabs a shovel and whacks him over the head with the shovel, killing him. Now, I thought this was a fucking evil scene, and just shows you how much contempt the Germans had for German bomber pilots. Again, you can get their hatred, but that still should not have been allowed to happen. I don't think I heard of any of this sort of stuff happening in the UK. I could be wrong, but a lot of this did happen in Germany when it came to British and American pilots who landed in Germany, which again they still think is a war crime. So whilst the Germans are going somewhere to dig a hole to bury the Americans, Bucky jumps off the carriage and tries to kind of pull himself together, and he legs it to get away from those evil bastards. Next scene, Rosenthal is in bed. He wakes up, heads down, meets with the doctor, who he met with earlier to talk about releasing him back to base, but the doctor said no. So he's come downstairs after trying to get some sleep. He hears his doctor's listening to some bad music, so he changes the record, and then whilst he's talking to the doctor, he talks about the fact that he doesn't think the men should be talking about their feelings, and that they should just focus on winning the war and freeing people from the Nazis' control. But the doctor kind of tries to pull him back and say, people got to relax, and people are having problems. We can't just turn away from that. And I get both sides of the argument here, I get Rosenthal's point about just getting the job done and going home and freeing people from, fascists. But you can't just you can't just keep ignoring that some people are having problems mentally. If you do that, then more people could die and more people could have serious mental issues after the war. You have to, accept that this has to happen, and Rosenthal has to have a break. And I did enjoy that scene. The next scene is Bucky getting captured by German police, getting taken to a Luftwaffe base, where he is then interrogated by a Luftwaffe pilot who tries to find out information about the upcoming delivery of new flying fortresses to England, but Bucky tells him he's not going to tell him any information, and this Luftwaffe pilot tries to threaten Bucky with the with the Gestapo, telling him if he doesn't cooperate with him, he'll be dealing with a bunch of fundamentalists. But Bucky does not fold. He refuses to give any information about the delivery and is then taken back to a cell where he will await being sent to a military prison camp. We then get a couple of scenes with Cross and Sandra. I keep forgetting her name. Sandra. They have a couple of drinks together. Cross brings up the fact that he lost Bubbles and how it's really affecting him, how he's kind of second guessing himself, thinking that if Bubbles was in charge, maybe more people would have lived. But Sandra kind of, tells him, stop thinking like that. We're in the middle of a war. You don't second guess yourself. We need to defeat the Nazis, and that's the main priority. And also, Cross has also been asking Sandra about her job. She keeps dodging the question or making up jobs. I think everybody pretty much realizes she's a spy. Like, I'm not saying like she's working for the Nazis. No, she's a British spy who's just probably been sent there to, I think, keep an eye on things. I suspect that, I don't know, or maybe she's taking a break. Who knows? But she's definitely a spy. So Sandra and Cross go to a party where you get this song about fighting the Nazis and fascism, and Cross then head back home together, where Sandra gets called back to her job. She grabs a bike and tells Cross that if he's ever in London, give her a call. And that's the end of Cross and Sandra in this episode. The next scene is Rosenthal at a card game with his pilots, where one of them brings up Rosenthal singing a song and how that made him feel safer, feel like he's not alone. And again, you can kind of see the pressure of war is, affecting him. And Ross finally starts to see that, yes, this probably was a good thing for his men. To give them a break, to give them some time to kind of pull themselves together, because it is hitting them hard. So they have their week of vacation at this flak house, and after that they're sent back to base and are then sent back on mission, where Rosenthal is kind of still struggling himself. He tries to push himself to go back in the plane. He struggles with it a little bit, but then he starts tapping on the plane and remembering the song, and that gives him enough courage, enough force to push him to get back in the plane and head on to his next mission. The last scene, which I think is probably the most delighted I've been, this scene is Bucky going to the prisoner of war camp, and we find out Buck is still alive. He's in the prison camp and he's alive and well. I'm glad that Buck's alive. He's a great character, and Then one of the guys in the prison says, "Welcome to the rest of the war," basically for you, which you can see in Bucky's face is not something he's going to let happen. And that's how the episode ends. A great episode. I love the fact it focused on, PTSD and finding out Buck is still alive. Listen, he's a great character. I love the guy. Again, sad to see him go. Glad to see he's back. And hopefully we'll see Buck and Bucky back in the plane bombing the Nazis. And that's the end of my review. If you like this review, give it a like. If you dislike this review, give it a dislike. And if you like my content, do think about subscribing. And if you have a comment, leave it below and I'll try to get back to it. Enter Wood Soldier. Bye.